They're going to go back and they're going to lock in the first 24 to 48 hours of all the statements that they took, all the interviews that they did in neighborhoods, all the places they went to. They're going to go back to those first couple of notes. One of them that, they may believe is legit. And they're going to try to connect those dots in relationship to why they believe these things are not just circumstantially legit, but they can be proved in a court.
Hey guys, it's Jackson High here with TMZ. Now we have officially reached the 3-month mark since Nancy Guthrie was initially abducted, and still the authorities who are peeling back the layers of this intricate case have given no answers to the public. We ourselves don't know where they are at this point in the investigation. Maybe they do have a lead on who could have conducted this crime. Maybe they don't, but there has been a lot of discussion regarding whether or not this crime was conducted by one or more individuals. And to talk to me about that today, I'm bringing on retired homicide detective Chris McDonough. He is also the host of the podcast, The Interview Room. And I think it's also important to mention that he is the director of law enforcement relations for the Cold Case Foundation. So Mr. McDonough, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the invite.
Of course. Well, thank you for being here. Now, first off, before this interview started, we were kind of talking about why you think there is another person involved in this case. Obviously, we see the person on the doorbell footage, which has become infamously tied to this case now, shared millions and millions of times. But you believe that there is a second person off camera. Why?
Well, one of the most interesting things that we have to consider here for Miss Guthrie is the management of her once they get her out of the house, or whoever this individual was on the porch. Okay. And when we think about that, Jackson, one of the things that you're going to need, and which is obvious here, there was some type of vehicle that was used to remove her from those premises. Okay. As a result of that, now you have to go back from, a behavioral analysis aspect and think, okay, do we have, the placement of the vehicle positioned to where if she were to be taking out of the back of the house, there would be a vehicle there, i.e. near the garage and or the back gate. And so that individual inside the house could say, okay, I got to get her to the back gate. And then I need to get her to the car that's probably waiting outside because we know she's not there. So some type of transportation was used, okay? And then if we think about this even further, the fact that, she is now taken out of the front, now that suspect behavior starts to change, okay? And so you have to now think, okay, does he manage her in the home? Okay, meaning does he hurt her in the home? And that we don't have evidence of that at this point. The law enforcement authorities have not given us any evidence that there was, problems with inside her bedroom or anything like that. We only have it at the front door, maybe at the interior threshold and maybe on the front porch. Okay, but something had to change in the suspect's behavior, because if the fact that he was going to take her out the back, well, then you would logically think he is also prepared to park a car back there and put her into that vehicle and move her. But that's not where the evidence points us. The evidence points us, i.e. the blood, in the front of the house. So that means he has to do one of two things. A, he has to tell Miss Guthrie, stay here, I'm going to move the car around, hypothetically. Or B, okay, he's already positioned the car out front and then takes her out the front, okay, and puts her into the vehicle. Well, then that is a problem because he's already positioned the back doors, allegedly, put those open to take her out the back. So what is he going to do? Take her out the back and then move her around and bring her around to the front? Okay. So that, for me, is kind of this idea that says, okay, there has to be more than one person involved in this thing, because we're only thinking about just the front porch, okay? But we're not thinking about once she's outside, okay, that there had to be somebody else also working in conjunction to get her removed from that property, and i.e. the three of them, let's say hypothetically, remove her simultaneously from take her away from that property.
Interesting. And I think what's also important to mention is the blood evidence that we have. Obviously, you know, there's those pictures that were released of Nancy Guthrie's blood on her front porch, and you know, I've spoken to people that were there on the scene who detailed that the blood started in a large spatter at her front door, and it trailed all the way to the end of that walkway before hitting the asphalt on the road, which suggests that there was indeed a getaway driver. If you were working with the FBI Phoenix Field Office or the Pima County Sheriff's Office in this case, what would you be doing to further this investigation?
Well, there'd be a couple of things that you have to look at, right? You have to look at the data points. And what are those data points that we have? We have a data point from the garage opening, you know, 11:48, 11:50, it closes, okay? But what other data points do we have? Well, we know that they took various vehicles in this particular case, okay? And one of those vehicles, obviously a Range Rover. The second was a family vehicle where, you know, she was last seen in that vehicle, okay? But then now you have to ask even further, why are you doing that? Okay. Why? Because are you looking for telemetrics data? And if that's the case, then what you're trying to do is see where that vehicle went. Okay. Well, as an investigator, I'm asking the question, do you not believe parts of narratives? Okay, that you have to take the telemetrics data out of, you know, a family car and then hold that vehicle for over 40 days? Okay, why are you checking the telemetrics data if you're only looking for proof of life within that vehicle that she was taken from point A to point B and dropped off? You can do that in 2 days, 3 days. Okay, you can take a story and a narrative and say, okay, she's in this car. Let's check that box and, you know, see if there's any evidentiary value inside the right front passenger seat. Okay, from when she left that car. That garage door goes up at 10:48. The garage door comes out at 10:50 or goes down at 10:50. Okay. But we don't have any other data points. We don't have a data point of that garage going up and a suspect taking her out of that garage and putting her into another vehicle and transporting her out. Okay. So those are the kind of things where investigators, you know, I know there's been a lot of talk about the telemetrics inside of the vehicles. Okay. Well, for me, that was almost this idea that says, well, why are the investigators doing that in such a minutia detail? Okay, that they're trying to find the data points in the Range Rover and they're trying to find data points in a Honda Civic, okay, or CRV. Okay, why are they doing that? Because if somebody says I took person A to this location and dropped them off, okay, well then you don't need to get the entire telemetric system in that vehicle. Okay, if you're just looking as an investigative process, okay, to prove that she was in that car. Okay. They're looking for data points. So again, it comes back to the vehicle. You say, okay, well, where's this vehicle? Where's it been? And why are we doing this from an investigative analysis point? Which leads into a secondary question. Okay. The 911 call. Okay. Who makes the 911 call? Well, if it's a medical event the night before, well, then guess what? Who's going to make the very first call is going to be Miss Guthrie. Okay, Nancy Guthrie herself. I'm having a medical emergency. I need the paramedics here. Okay, which would have explained potentially, you know, the back doors being open. Okay, but we don't have that information released to the public yet. Okay, all we know is that the next morning when somebody is looking for her, i.e. the family, okay, they make a 911 call. Okay, so which leads to another question. Did they call the girlfriends and say, hey, did Nancy call you last night? And did somebody come over here and take her out of the house? Okay, because these are the same people that reported her missing at the church function. Okay? And those are the kind of steps that I think are taking place behind the scenes, you know, in an investigation such as this. There's one thing to catch these guys, okay, and there's another thing to say we've studied these guys. Okay, just think of the lion hunter and the lion in the cage at the zoo. Profilers go to the zoo and they study the lion. I have to figure out what type of lion it is, okay, before I can put him in the cage. So that solvability rate is pretty good so far, okay? So I look at minutia details like this, and the details like this are telling us clearly, okay, there has to be at least one, maybe two, at least one other individual involved. We have evidence of that potential because, you know, the investigators, again, are focusing on that vehicle. And how do we know that? Because they're looking for video. Okay, they're looking for video from February 24th, from you know, whatever the dates are. Okay, weeks and weeks before this incident takes place. Okay, now again, that is behavior that raises the risk of the offender, and which is never a good thing. And two or more people is never a good thing either in this type of case. Okay. However, you know, suspects are, you know, they have surprised me more than once. I've sat down many times with perpetrators and said, hey, you know, we were thinking A, B, C, and D, and they just look at you across the table and say, well, you got it wrong. Okay. I was doing E, F, and G. Okay. And you go, okay, teach me, help me understand what you were thinking and why you were thinking that way. Why did you show up in the secondary photograph without the gun and without the backpack? Okay. And then why did you change that concept and show up with the gun and the backpack? What was going on? Okay. And you'll be surprised. You know, sometimes they'll say, well, you know, so-and-so was out in the car. I didn't have to worry about that. And I had a radio, hypothetically. I could just tell them, pull the car around the front. We're not going out the back.
So, being the director of law enforcement relations for the Cold Case Foundation, you have a lot of experience with cold cases. What would make this a cold case, and do you think that the authorities are any closer to finding the person who conducted this crime?
Well, what would make it a cold case is when they 100% run out of thinking outside of the box. Okay. And an investigation, as long as it's fluid and you've got people such as myself, you know, playing, you know, the what if, have we thought about this concept, then the investigation will maintain itself. Okay. And it will keep moving. Okay. At this point, they're going to have to, they're relying strictly on, it sounds like anyway, they're relying strictly on this DNA evidence that comes back. Okay. Well, what if that DNA comes back and it's not anything or anyone that can be identified? Now you're going, okay, what else do we have? And you know what they're going to do, Jackson? They're going to go back, at least they should, and they're going to lock in the first 24 to 48 hours of all the statements that they took, all the interviews that they did in neighborhoods, all the places they went to. They're going to go back to those first couple of notes. One of them that, you know, they may believe is legit. Okay. And they're going to try to connect those dots in relationship to, you know, why they believe these things are, you know, not just circumstantially, you know, legit, but they can be proved in a court. And that evidence in itself will tell you whether or not the case is cold or not. And when those things are all exhausted, then a lot of agencies turn to organizations such as us. We have 167 experts from around the world, including John Douglas, who is our executive director emeritus, which he started the Cold Case Foundation, or excuse me, he started the Behavior Science Unit. Okay. Well, you know, John and many others, Greg Cooper, who's our executive director, was also the director of the Behavior Science Unit. Okay. So we not only have profilers, we have the people that started it, the business, okay, in our organization. And so that in of itself, agencies turn to us, to our type of group, and say, hey, you know, can we ask you some questions? And what we do is we have a wall just like this of a Zoom meeting with all the experts that you could possibly want, and agencies get to throw, you know, questions at that board and you know, take a second opinion. That's really important when a case starts to get cold.
Mr. McDonough, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.